Okay, so this tutorial is all about how to use Spiro. Spiral is a Houdini project file that takes any image and turns it into a 2D spiral that you can print in Illustrator. When you first open the Spiro folder, you'll notice the project file, a folder for the input images, and a folder for the output images. You don't have to organize the folder in this way, but this is the way that I like to work, and it's how I'll be showing you in this tutorial. So I have an image here that I want to process. First thing I'm going to do is copy it into the input images folder. Let's go ahead and double click the Houdini project to launch it. There are three parts of the screen in Houdini that you need to worry about. One is the node view, then there's the properties panel, and lastly is the viewport. Let's talk about the viewport. In the viewport, we can move around the camera. Hold down Alt and also the left mouse button, and when you drag the mouse around holding these two buttons down, you'll be able to orbit around the geometry. If you hold Alt and use the right mouse button, you'll be zooming in and out. And if you hold Alt and hold the middle mouse button down, you'll be panning around in 2D. Now that you know how to move the camera around, let's enter the front view by going into the top right corner where it says Persp, and we're just going to set view to the front. Just take a second to center the spiral into view. And now let's talk about the node view. So each of these four nodes represents a step in the creation of the final spiral image. The blue square means that that step is visible. So much like a layer in Photoshop, you can turn that step on and off. To do this, all we have to do is click on the blue square itself. Now, when you activate step 4, what it does is it'll write out the final image. And it'll also calculate the 2D version of the 3D snake. All of this takes some time, so you're going to want to keep step 4 invisible until you're ready to make the final image. When you select a node by clicking on it, you'll notice that its properties appear above in the Properties panel. Also, when you select a node, you might find that the node itself, the geometry, turns yellow in the viewport, which makes it a bit hard to see. So you can always click elsewhere in the node view, like on a blank spot, and it'll deselect the geometry, allowing you to see it, while also leaving its properties that you just selected open. So you'll see me do that a few times just to be able to see it. That's what I'm doing when it goes yellow and then it goes back. So let's click the Image Settings node. And in the Properties panel, we're just going to click this button here to browse for an image. Because we copied the file into the Input Images folder earlier, you should see the file right here in the list. So let's just double click it. So when the image comes in for the first time, you may notice that it's stretched or squashed, or you may need to manipulate the size of it to get the right crop that you want to fit inside the circle. The first thing that we're going to take care of is calibrating the image. So let's enable visibility for the Image Settings node, and then click away so that it's no longer yellow. Then we're going to adjust the aspect slider. So we're just going to eyeball it so that the image has the right width to height ratio. Now that we have that taken care of, we're going to use the left and right, up and down, rotate, and uniform scale sliders to just get the image to crop and appear nicely framed within the circle. We can turn on and off the node visibility if we prefer to see just the spiral or just the image, depending on how you like to work. So let's do it together. Okay, and we could stop there if we wanted to. I think the image is looking pretty good, but if we want to make some additional changes to the spiral itself, or to the contrast of the images, or the width of the spiral, we have that control. So let's talk about the spiral geometry node first. In here, we can control the number of rounds in the spiral, so more rounds or less rounds, and you can see that this updates in real time. And then you can adjust whether you want it to be a perfect circle or a slightly wider oval, depending on what you want to get out of it, the kind of framing that you want. So that's in the spiral geometry node. And then in the tweak and preview node, you can see that you can adjust the stroke width, the overall width of the snake, and then a couple of sliders here to adjust the contrast of the incoming image. Now, ideally, you would pre-process the image in Photoshop to get more control over what you want. But you do have basic controls here, and this is one of those situations where you're going to want to play with the sliders to get what you want. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you're not allowed to have overlapping lines. So if the width is too thick or the rounds are too many, whatever combination of factors that makes one of the lines too fat and bleed into the other lines, that'll confuse step 4. So you'll either end up with an image that's unusable or blank. Okay, so just a note on the settings for step 4. So if you click on it without toggling the visibility, you can see that there's a setting for padding and stroke width. Padding is the amount of white space around the spiral, and stroke width is the thickness of the outline. Of course, these can both be changed in Illustrator, but it's nice to have them up front. To generate the final file, all we have to do is toggle visibility at the last step. So click it, and then click it off, and every time we do that, it's going to write in the output folder the spiro.svg file. And if we did it right, we should be able to open that file in Illustrator and see our results. So let's have a look at that. And I think that looks pretty good to me. Now, we can click this button here in Illustrator to invert the stroke and fill color. And if we did everything right, that'll show us what the image will look like when it's finally colored in.